Hello and welcome to Outlaw Bookseller with me, Stephen E. Andrews, writer, bookseller, general all-round good guy, all that stuff. And today we're going to talk about really a seminal topic which you'd think everybody would know by now, and I know some of you will know this, but I just felt the need to put it out there because I deliver this sort of little lecture in work regularly when I can sell the book that it's about, because really what I want to talk about today is something which still a lot of people, as I say, surprisingly don't know, which is about the book which is the text of Hollywood and cinematic and televisual SF. Full stop. If you see science fiction on the screen, this book has probably influenced it more than anything else, and still, you know, it's a book which these days is unfairly obscure. And I'm speaking about A. Van Vogt's The Voyage of the Space Beagle. Now, this is old stuff. It's nearly 100 years old. And I want to start doing more about the SF which I'm the most interested in, which is stuff really from sort of mid-60s to mid-80s, and do some more sort of modern stuff. You notice I say modern, not contemporary, because there is a difference. But I really feel that we sort of need to tackle some of the sort of golden age things still to sort of settle them in people's minds and to sort of reveal why they're important, but at the same time not to dwell on them too long, because things have moved on since then. They're important historically, and some of them are still good to read, and this is one of them. So, what do I mean by the text of Hollywood SF? Well, text, of course, means the founding text of a particular genre or strand of literature or film or any sort of cultural sort of production artifact. So really, when you look at science fiction cinema, something I'm always saying is that it's usually decades and decades behind written SF, even though in terms of genre SF, science fiction as a term was coined in 1926, really it's sort of grown up alongside cinema and later television. So the two are sort of permanently intertwined in the minds of people in the sort of mass. The mass media has always been part of SF, and in lots of ways, it's a shame because it has sort of held it back. I mean, science fiction existed before the term was coined, but it wasn't codified. And of course, what people think of when they think of science fiction and they use the dreadful term sci-fi, guys, please don't use it. It's Harlan Ellison didn't like it, Ursula Le Guin didn't like it, I don't like it. We're going to why another time. But the real thing is, when most people think of science fiction, they think of what they've seen on screens rather than what's written in books, and books the precursors. It's just that in terms of genre SF, the SF from the magazine school from 1925 onwards is pretty much tied, you know, in people's minds because of the historical sort of context those things are in. So looking at the book, which really did more to influence science fiction on screens than any other, we're going to look at The Voyage of the Space Beagle by A. Van Vogt. I'm going to show this to you. This is a 1979 printing. This book has pretty much been out of print in the UK for, I mean, I don't think I've ever sold a new UK copy, and I've been selling books in British bookshops since 1984. It is increasingly hard to pick up, so if you see it in any condition, do snap it up. It is in print in the States from Tor in quite a nice trade paperback edition. And for many years I was importing that and selling it. And what I'm going to tell you today is how I used to sell it, basically. So it really sort of influenced three key things in SF screen works. And they are, in order of release, not essentially in significance: Forbidden Planet, the wonderful 1950s SF film, which I hope you all know and love. And if you don't, rush out and buy it immediately. It also influenced, to a lesser but important degree, Star Trek, and this is Star Trek the motion picture. Obviously, when I say Star Trek, I mean the entire sort of corpus of Star Trek text, particularly this sort of the original thing, which is the one you want to go for. That's Star Trek the movie. And a lot of people don't like this. I quite like its sort of creeping sort of gradualness, and you know, and you love the characters. That's why people like Star Trek, is the characters. And of course, Forbidden Planet and Star Trek, I mean, there's a certain influence on Star Trek from Forbidden Planet, but it comes from the book I'm going to talk about, so we'll see that. And most importantly of all, from 1979, the wonderful Alien, which, I mean, I don't think anybody dislikes Alien. I think it's because it's primal raw power. And we're going to talk about Van Vogt's Space Beagle and see where that comes from. So, A. Van Vogt, one of the key figures of the Golden Age. And when we talk about the Golden Age of SF really begins. This is what all the sort of serious critics agree with, and this is my take on it as well, with the issue of astounding science fiction that was published in July 1939. Now at that point, Astounding was being edited and managed by John W. Campbell Jr., also known as Don A. Stewart, who wrote the seminal story Who Goes There, filmed 3 times as The Thing. And Campbell sort of brought a new sort of discipline to sort of SF in magazines, because he got a bit fed up with people just moving on from Western stories, and sort of like the 6-gun became the blaster, you know, the horse became the spaceship, the Indians become the aliens, you know. It's obviously really horrible, you know, so you get that sort of thing, and he wanted to sort of get science into it and make it truly into science fiction, and that was Campbell's contribution, which is deemed to be sort of really, really important. And I think that's absolutely true and fair. So in the 1939 edition of Astounding, we saw the publication of Van Voogt's first story, and that's a story called Black Destroyer. In that issue, there were seminal stories from Theodore Sturgeon, Ether Breather, one of the best SF titles of all time. I think Heinlein and Asimov were also in there. Now, I may be wrong, but I think it was Asimov and Heinlein's first published stories as well, but it was certainly at least 2 debuts out of those 4. So that was the codification of the Golden Age, and that's when it really started. And when you read Black Destroyer, the initial part of Voyage of the Space Beagle, because this is comprised of 4 short stories, 3 of which were published in Astounding, 1 from another magazine with some linking material written up, you really see where things come from. And if you think that Black Destroyer was written in 1939, published in 1939, and Alien came 40 years later, and we're now 40 years on from that, it just shows you how leaden and slow the pace is of cinema. When you think how many films you see now, which are still people running around corridors trying to get away from monsters, you know, it's just like, it's old hat, really, it really is. Which is why I'm not very interested in contemporary SF cinema, unless it steps out the box, because that's the whole thing, the bucket of water in the face, as I've said before. So Black Destroyer was published in 1939, and basically the background to the Space Beagle stories, and you can find 3 of them here in Transfinite, which is sort of like a best of A.E. Van Vogt, the essential A.E. Van Vogt from Nesfa, beautiful book, now in its 3rd or 4th printing. I do recommend you get this. The basic idea is that the Space Beagle, as it suggests, is a spaceship on a voyage of discovery, just to look for strange new worlds and to find life and what have you. It's an exploratory mission, and it's staffed by military and scientists and what have you. The crew is entirely male, and they're sort of chemically castrated, I guess, is how you would describe it. You know, they're given suppressants. There's no women on board, so it is quite old school in that respect. And they have 4 little adventures, and this is where you see the whole Star Trek thing coming in. It's people, you see their relationships evolve, and you know, they're not sort of always very civilized. You know, there's a lot of sort of backstabbing and infighting goes on, but that's realism for you, and of course something's been suppressed in these men, so it comes out another way. So that's the sort of background. So it is a voyage on a pioneering ship to seek out new life and new civilizations. So there you go, there's Star Trek. What can you say about that? Anyway, in Black Destroyer, the first story, the ship lands on a planet where the sort of dominant race have pretty much died out, and the dominant race are cat-like beings, very large cat-like beings, except they're quadrupeds, but the forelimbs are longer by twice the size of the rear one, so they're sort of rather sort of unusual. And on the shoulders of this cat-like being, you get tentacles which can form like into fingers from manipulation. But basically, you've got a very large black super saber-toothed tiger. But it's an intelligent being, and it's basically starving to death. And it feeds on id. And id, of course, is the dark side of the Jungian unconscious, the black side, the dangerous side. And it's also related to phosphorus in this book. I'm not going to tell you too much more. But these scientists, they foolishly decide to bring this creature, because it looks like a cat, even though it's very big, onto the Space Beagle, and it goes on from there. So straight away, you see a similarity to Alien, so where Ash and the other members of the Nostromo bring on board this black alien. So straight away, you've got this thing, you've got this black cat being, and you've got the xenomorph in Alien. So there's 2 similarities there straight away. And you've got the similarity to Star Trek. I'm not going to tell you the rest of the story, you can read it for yourself. How does this tie to Forbidden Planet? Well, if you look at Forbidden Planet, obviously the thing that people go on and on about with Forbidden Planet, and I do love it, it is wonderful, is how the plot is similar to The Tempest. And, you know, there is an element of that. You know, you've got Leslie Nielsen there, who's like sort of a template for Shatner as Kirk later on. And he's got this flying saucer with all the chaps from Earth. They've got Robbie the robot. And they sort of land on this planet where there's been colonists and nobody has been there for like a generation or so. And he's warned off. And this, again, Star Trek just draws him. How many times did we see this in Star Trek where, you know, Shatner and his guys go to a planet, you know, they beam down, blah, 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 blah. And you know how it goes. And they encounter a menace. This is a bit of a spoiler, but it won't sort of really ruin your enjoyment of the film, because the enjoyment of the film really lies in its magnificent visuals, fantastic electronic music, which is really way ahead of its time, because BB and Louis Barron, who did the score, they actually invented sort of electronic modules to make the sounds in it, which are fantastic. And basically the creature in Forbidden Planet is invisible, though you do see it as it breaks through a force shield into the starship at one point. And it has a certain physical similarity when you see its outlines as they're animated. It does look a bit like the Quirrell in Black Destroyer from Voyage of the Space Beagle. So you see that. And also, it's actually the embodied id of the villain of the piece. So he's an unwitting villain in a way. So the id is there, the cat-like creature is there, the men on the mission are there. So straight away you see these direct ties. So already by a certain point, you know, the Space Beagle, even by the 50s, was emerging as the predominant sort of influence. Now, when you come to Alien, which we will come on to, a lot of people talk about things like It, the Terror from Beyond Space. People talk about how At the Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft is an influence on Alien. And yet there's a similarity, but it's more like Prometheus. The thing is in Space Beagle is that there are very specific things. So you've got Black Destroyer, the cat-like being, the id, the men in the spaceship on their special mission. It all hangs together. So there's a very sort of strong sort of connection there to begin with. So if you manage to pick up Space Beagle, you can actually pick this up. I would recommend this. It is fantastic. It doesn't have every story from here in it though, which is a bit frustrating. Nesford don't work for profit. They're really there to curate the legacy of SF, and obviously there's copyright issues, so they license all this material, so they don't make any money. They're just very dedicated fans and publishers who do this magnificent work and produce these beautiful books, which they keep in print. They keep reprinting them as long as they sell. And basically the first, let's see, I've got my notes here because I can never remember the chapter numbers, even though I've read this book many times. Black Destroyer basically is the first, have I written it down? The first 6 chapters. So if you pick this up, read the first 6 chapters and that's Black Destroyer. There's a bit of linking material then before the next story in it. And it is fantastic. People criticise Van Vogt for the writing being crude, and the writing is crude, but it's very powerful. But you're talking about something primal here, and it's the same as Alien. Alien's quite crude, but it's beautifully executed, and it is quite primal. And of course, the advantage that Alien had over a film like It, you know, the Being from Beyond Space, whatever it's called, is that by that point special effects have got really good. It's the same with SF. I mean, you know, these guys are writing for very little amount of money to tight deadlines for magazines. You know, obviously these things evolve, you know, the quality improves, but there's a lot to be said for pioneers. The people who first come up with these ideas, first thought, best thought, for me are the people who really matter. It's easy to draw on other people's work and improve on it, but to come up with something original is really quite something. It's harder now, yes, because we've seen so much more happening, but you have to cleave to the pioneers. They are important. They deserve our respect. There is one more thing I want to add about Black Destroyer, and that is that the real sort of issues, the problems that the crew face in dealing with the Quirrell are really solved by an outsider on the crew, a character called Elliot Grosvenor. And Elliot Grosvenor is a new type of scientist in this future imagined world. They're all the sort of guys on board the ship are specialists, you know, there's sort of biologists, there's geologists, there's every specialist you can think of. But Elliot Grosvenor is a nexualist. And naturalism is something that Van Vogt came out, which is really about the science of connections. And what Grosvenor does, he has an overall education in sciences, and he's able to synthesize different disciplines, and he consults with the scientists and he pulls it together, and it's only through synthesizing things that he can solve problems. And because naturalism is a new science in the universe of Space Beagle, he's regarded as a bit of a sort of a, how can I put it, almost a charlatan by the rest of the crew. But gradually, as the narratives go on throughout the 4 stories, he becomes more central, more important, and they begin to get some respect for him. They start to work together more as a team, and it's really, really good. And he faces opposition all the way through the book. In that way, because he's an outsider, he's rather like Spock in Star Trek, because Spock is half human, half Vulcan. He's cold and logical. There are flashes occasionally of emotion, but he is an outsider, and the others find him very difficult to relate to. But gradually he becomes an integrated part of the crew, and they all grow to love him and respect him and work with him. And the whole thing between McCoy and Spock obviously is very, very important to Star Trek's success, because it's the human characters we relate to, and the 3 central characters with different sort of aspects of human behaviour. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but you could write reams about that. I'm sure people have. So that's an important part. So Grosvenor, the naturalist, and naturalist from Nexus, Nexus, meaning connection. And of course, Philip K. Dick, being a huge Van Vogt fan, he sort of homaged that really into Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, because of course the androids are Nexus 6, aren't they? Nexus 6. And there is that question about how many androids get to Earth in Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and I think it's 6. But if you actually count them up, it gets a bit ambiguous, but that's for another time and another video. So Elliot Grosvenor, the naturalist, is a key figure, and he's a precursor of Spock. The second story in Space Beagle, after some linking material, is a story called War of Nerves, and it doesn't actually give the story titles in here, and that's approximately chapters 7 to 12. I think it's actually more like 9 to 12 and 7 8 to linking material. And War of Nerves is in here, and that wasn't published till long after. That was published in 1950. So in the book the stories are out of order, and that's about some telepathic bird-like aliens. It's quite interesting. I'm not going to talk too much about that because I don't want to give too much away, and I want to stick to the Hollywood side. And then the third story in the book, which in Space Beagle, any copy you get will be chapters 13 to 21, is a story called Discord in Scarlet, which is a wonderful title. And Discord in Scarlet was published in Astounding in December 39, so it's 6 months after, it's less than 6 months after Black Destroyer. So Black Destroyer and Discord in Scarlet are very closely linked, both in terms of chronology of the writing and publication, and in their feel, and in their influence over Alien, which we will come to in a moment. So Discord in Scarlet is my favourite Van Vogt story, and is the one really that centres the debate around Alien. And in that there is a strange red being who floats in space. He's the last of his kind. He's trapped in space, and again slowly dying, similar to the Quirrell in Black Destroyer. And he senses the presence of the Space Beagle as it draws near. And again, very foolishly, the scientists on board the Space Beagle bring this being inside. And this is where it gets really, really, really derivative when you come to the film, when you come to Alien. And you can see why what happened. Basically, what happened was that Van Vogt brought a case against 20th Century Fox, who made Alien, because he said it basically ripped off Space Beagle. And it is absolutely true, it really is. Now, Dan O'Bannon, who was the screenwriter of Alien, who of course plays Sergeant Pinback in the wonderful Dark Star, by John Carpenter, and who co-wrote Dark Star with John Carpenter. Obviously there's massive Philip K. Dick influences there as well. There's also Forbidden Planet influence, what have you. What Dan O'Bannon said, sadly he's no longer with us, great screenwriter, great filmmaker and actor. He said, I didn't just steal from Van Vogt, I stole from everybody. And his argument was that this stuff was out there in the very stuff of the genre. But nonetheless, it wasn't long ago. It's not like Homer, it's a different sort of thing. So I felt it was very valid. Now, they settled out of court. The rumour is that Van Vogt got $50,000. Now, this time he's very old and ill and getting on. A lot of people in the sort of SF community felt, well, he should have got $500,000 at least, considering how successful Alien was and how the franchise, as it's laughingly called, which makes it sound like a burger, has been. And, I agree with them. I think he should have got more money, because when you read Discord in Scarlet, it's really quite shocking. The whole thing about the alien that lays eggs in people's chests, that's in Discord in Scarlet. The very shape of the being and its intentions are similar as well, except it's red, not black, which is why it's Discord in Scarlet. And Vogt had already done black in Black Destroyer. And as I say, if you combine the Coeurl with Ixtal, the being in Discord in Scarlet, you pretty much have alien. So you've got that behavior which is rather like certain wasps we have, which, you know, they lay their eggs in a living host and what have you. You also have the thing, do you remember the thing in Alien where it has acid for blood and it goes through the decks? Well, that comes from moments in Discord in Scarlet where the being can kind of turn itself intangible and it can seep from level to level, and it's fascinating stuff. And the sort of battle between Ixtal and the men on board the Space Beagle is very, very similar, because it's very, very unpleasant. So I'm not going to tell you any more because I want you to read it for yourself. So get hold of a copy of Voyage of the Space Beagle and keep Forbidden Planet, Star Trek and Alien in mind, and you'll see where it all goes. So it really is quite shocking, and as I say, I think Vogt should have got a lot more money. So that's the Eurotext of Hollywood SF. I mean, there's lots of books and lots of stories that played parts in influencing films, and obviously it influenced those three things. Those three things in themselves influence lots of other SF films and TV series, and we can see that in almost anything. You can always draw parallels. So if you want to go back to the motherlode, if you love science fiction cinema of the traditional kind, the space opera things with voyages, monsters and teams in conflict on board, then it just comes from Van Vogt. So there you go. So, you know, do him a favour, read the books, do yourself a favour, and that gives you a proper historical context for science fiction cinema. Is there anything else to say? I don't think so. I hope you enjoyed that. I'll do a bit more about how books link to films. I was going to write a book at one point called Future Watch, which really examined sort of major SF films and showed where the sources, the literary sources were, even if they weren't credited. But that was during sort of the financial crash, and after 12 weeks of talks with Alison and Busby, it never happened. But there you go. It is what it is. I'd have to sit down and watch a lot of DVDs and read a lot of books again, so maybe it wasn't such a bad thing. So anyway, signing out for now. Please like, subscribe, comment and all that, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.